Hi, everyone, and welcome to Practice Growth HQ. Now, today we're going to talk about monetizing big ticket purchases at your practice. You ever been tempted to buy maybe a bigger piece of equipment or something that you think is going to really transform your practice? It's fair to say that doesn't always happen, does it? And the perfect person to talk about this is my guest, Jessica Jones. Now, she's the founder and CEO of Build Your Cash Medical Practice. And she specializes in bridging the gap between medicine and business with more than 30 years of experience as a practice consultant, clinic owner, and entrepreneur, all the way from outside Philadelphia in the United States. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Jessica, we like to start with the fast five, kind of quicker questions, quicker answers, so people can get to know you quickly. Question one, where did you grow up?
I grew up about an hour and a half outside of Philadelphia in a really small town.
Okay. Does that suggest you're still living there?
No, I moved to Philadelphia when I went to university and I stayed there and set my life up there. So I'm now just right in the suburbs.
Very good. Question two, favorite book besides your own?
The Achievers by Dr. Gerald Bell.
Okay, what's that one about?
It's So he's an expert on leadership. He's got a round table at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and that book is about the different personality traits that everybody has. Everybody has all of them in different degrees, but it kind of helps you identify your own traits and work to take every trait has a positive and then in an extreme a negative. And it kind of teaches you if you're seeing this in somebody you're working with, how can you dial it in and bring that person and you into the positive part of that personality trait?
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Question three, what's one of your superpowers?
One of my superpowers is, I would say, problem solving and pivoting. So they go hand in hand.
Yes, interesting. Question four, something you wish your 20-year-old self knew.
To take more breaks. Work is going to go on and everything will be okay if you take a break to spend a little more time with loved ones.
Okay. Yes, I did some training yesterday with my team, and once again, we had a look at Bronnie Ware's The Top Five Regrets of the Dying. And yes, as you can imagine, when people are on their deathbeds, which is the premise of the story, she was a palliative care nurse. Not too many people say, I wish I spent more time in the office.
Yeah.
Uh,
Turn off the phone.
indeed, indeed.
It'll be okay.
Jessica, finally, question five, something you're grateful for.
Oh, my family, my children, and my entire family, my sisters and loved ones. I have a wonderful, close relationship with everybody, and it's just such a blessing. And I know it's not everybody has that, so I'm very grateful.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. Let's talk about the topic for today. Now, depending on what kind of healthcare practice the listeners have got, the idea of big purchases, big ticket items for the practice, it's not too far. One thing I've noticed, no matter what space you're in, industry, God bless them, and arguably Jessica and I are both in industry. Part of the job of industry is to keep innovating, and sometimes those innovations can make a massive difference to the practice, and sometimes it's kind of just so they can sell more stuff, let's be honest. I noticed this at one point. I was a pretty keen cyclist, and I noticed the cycling bike manufacturers, they'd keep coming out with a new model each year. And then I was playing a bit of golf for a while, and the same deal, the golf club manufacturers. And of course, my son reminds me about technology. He said to me, my iPhone's getting a bit old, and he said, don't buy one until later this year because all of the upgrades that they do for about 3 years are pretty minor, but then every 3 years there's a much more major one, and that's coming out later this year. So it is tricky to navigate because for the practitioners, they'll see things and they go, that looks pretty good. And sometimes that innovation is amazing and life-changing, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's driven by the need for industry to sell more stuff.
Yeah, one of the key things that I do for clients is often if I'm not helping them start up their business or solve problems in their business, I'm helping them to add revenue streams or to consider a revenue stream that they're thinking of adding. And we have a lot of device reps going into medical clinics of all different varied services and saying, hey, this will go hand in hand with your business. It's only this six-figure price, but when you're leasing it, it'll only take you two patients to pay for it every month. And it sounds great. So I help people kind of think, okay, it does sound great, but let's really evaluate it. And so one of the first things is, and a lot of business owners that I work with, particularly medical practitioners, have somebody doing their finances, but they're not looking at the reports every month. So that's the first step. Let's look at your profit and loss statements. And where are you? And how much cash flow do you have saved up? And what's your cushion? And what does this look like if you don't get the number of patients to pay for the list? So that's the number one. Let's look at the financial piece. The number two is, how does it actually fit with what you're passionate about and what your vision is for your business, right? Is it a disjointed addition or does it make sense? Because again, a lot of times the excitement of the promise of the money kind of flashes and removes the rational thinking of, is this right for me? And I get that, but I try and bring it back to, let's think about this really. How's it fit? Then let's say it is a fit with the business model. What does it actually look like? Do you have space for it? Does it need its own room? Where does it go in the business? And what kind of time does it take? And what's going to be involved with staff? Like, how long does a patient use this device? Is it in its own room? How long does the staff have to be with the patient before, during, and after the service? How long does it take to clean the device for the next person? This is stuff people don't think about. And I see practices buying something and returning it or selling it at a great loss because they didn't think about these things. And it's really a hindrance to conducting business the way they've been conducting business with patients. So it's getting in the way of seeing patients and caring for patients instead
Okay.
of adding revenue and helping the practice.
Well, let's recap those three steps. I
Yeah.
think many of the listeners would recognize this, if not in themselves, then perhaps in colleagues in similar practices. And I dare say you've got a more mature owner, and perhaps they've been at it for a number of years. They're more prone to this because perhaps there's a bit more money in the business, firstly. And then secondly, it's been seeing patients for years and years doing, I probably feel like a bit of a challenge. And I could go and get this new piece of equipment and that would revolutionize things. So step one is having a look at the numbers, including if, like in the example that Jessica gave, where the sales rep says, hey, just do two of these a month and it'll pay for itself. But to have a look at the numbers, well, what's the impact if you don't sell many of these things? And the second part is this consistent with the vision of your practice. And in fact, I found myself when you said that, Jessica, thinking, there's probably quite a few listeners who, when they're purchasing something like this, their own vision of their practice has probably got a bit dull. It's like, I don't perhaps have quite the strong same sense of where I want to get to in the business than what I did. And then the third point that you made was around the sort of space required and the practicalities. I went into a dental practice once, and the dentist had, I guess I'll call it a life-sized fat burning machine. Now, I'm sure that's not what I mean, that was the gist of it, which is
Yes.
something that you kind of sort of a case that kind of formed around you. And then the idea was you sit there for a while and it burns fat.
Sounds like a contour, like red light therapy pod that kind of
There we are. Yes, yes,
tightens skin, burns calories, all of the above.
yes,
Anti-aging.
yes.
Yes.
And I was sitting there thinking, really very similar to what you've just described. It was like, it's a really interesting idea. Can you give me 5 minutes in there? But also, it just felt a bit weird, actually, if I'm honest, with compared to what else was going on in the practice. So I guess what you've done is identify some of the potential problems associated with this. But Jessica, tell us about some success stories.
Sure. There's absolutely a number of, I could take the same device and look at a clinic who it just hasn't worked for and one that's been wildly successful with it. And that also has to do with, remember I said, make sure it fits what you're passionate about. If you're
Yes.
not passionate about something, you're never going to be successful having patients participate in it because your body doesn't lie. It gives away your true truth, right? So you have to believe in what you've got in your practice, and you've got to believe wholeheartedly that it works and it's the right thing for your patients. If you don't even think about it, and again, that's where people have been blindsided by the revenue idea without thinking through, do I like this? Do I believe in it? Am I going to be able to truly say to my patients, oh my gosh, you got to try this thing, right? Because the truth is, no matter what the device, anytime I've seen an owner be very passionate about something they're bringing on, they're successful, right? Because they believe they believe it works, and just that mindset is enough in most cases.
That's interesting. I was
Um,
thinking about Practice Growth HQ has different kind of healthcare professionals as listeners, and I've alluded to the dentist getting into what we'll call fat burning. Quote, in dentistry, one of the most common big ticket purchases is a milling machine. The most common brand is Ceric there, and this is a six-figure purchase. But I've seen things like whitening machines and so on that's they can just sit there in the spare room not doing much. I admit in physiotherapy, one of the things that I've seen is laser. And indeed, I've had a physiotherapist put a dot on my leg and say, here, hold this laser and do it there for a while. And again, I can imagine it's something that would sound exciting at a perhaps at a trade show that if they don't implement. I'm just trying to think, medicine, goodness me, it could be anything in that space. I'm not sure what you've seen there. Just thought it might be useful trying to pinpoint some of the different kind of potential purchases that we might see in the
Oh,
different care industries.
sure. You hit the nail on the head. Obviously, teeth whitening, sedation dentistry are some of the things in that arena. But I've absolutely seen dentists, at least clients in the US, looking to add weight loss or aesthetics to their practice,
Yeah,
which is interesting because even though dentists have the ability to prescribe and do all of these things, it is considered out of the scope of practice to do some of the things that they're seeking to add. So that's a consideration. Other things people look to add are all sorts of aesthetics as far as devices. Hyperbaric chambers, cool sculpting, cryo chambers are a big one.
wow.
Right now, we're seeing a lot of motion, and I would see we're moving from like an era of weight loss and wellness and IV therapy and those types of things to I think we're going to see a new focus on longevity,
Yeah,
right? Like
yes,
blue zones and longevity are going to become okay, how can I live to 150? How
yes.
can I extend my life? How can I add to the quality of my life? So we might move from things like medications and things like that to what's a longevity diet or what's a mental health diet. Like the mind diet is becoming, it's been around for a long time, but it's something that people are starting to shift to focus towards. Like, how can I stave off or prevent dementia? Right? Because we're
Yeah.
starting to think about the fact that we are living longer. So, how do we make sure that our brain is healthy if we're living longer and our body?
Okay.
Those are some
So,
things, and
so
that
there's
goes along with hyperbarics and things. Yeah.
Yep, so there's some good examples, listeners. We're not saying don't get these things, just
No.
that you are eyes wide open when you go into it. I did a little bit of research yesterday because I was doing a training course with my team on confidence. I'm currently in the Philippines and I've got some team members here. And interestingly, we said to them, hey, what would you like training on? And this was the thing that they ended up picking. So I thought, oh, better go and do some research. And there was something that you touched on, Jessica, which I just thought was worth unpacking the science behind this. You said if people are not passionate about something, then they're probably not going to implement it. But what I was looking at was the subconscious mind, because the research shows that the subconscious mind drives 90 to 95% of our behavior. And so while there might be a conscious decision to purchase one of these machines, what the research I was reading said is if at a subconscious level, Like whatever you believe at a subconscious level, you will do to be consistent with that belief. And so if at a
Mhm.
subconscious level you're like, oh, look, this is just a bit of equipment, so I'm not really that into it, etc., then all of those subconscious actions that you take, remember, 90 to 95% of what we do is based on that belief. And if your belief is this thing doesn't matter that much, then your body will act consistent with what that belief is. And so, as you say, if at a subconscious level you go, yeah, this thing's amazing, and I can really see the difference we can make to people, etc.,
Mhm.
etc., then your mind will cause you to act in a way that's consistent with that. So I thought that was quite interesting. There's a fair bit of science behind that. All right, let's stick with the more positive because this our message here is about monetizing these big ticket
Yeah.
purchases. So let's assume that the listeners in their heart of hearts go, no, this is not just a whim. I'm not just bored with my practice. I'm not just
Yeah.
wondering how to get a tax write-off. In Australia, the fiscal year finishes at the end of June. Let's say they're going into this with the right intentions. How
Yeah.
do they maximize the outcome?
First of all, there's a couple of things you touched on, and you talk about like getting bored or stagnant in the practice. And something I like to make sure that practice owners are doing is actually stepping out of the business and looking at it from a different standpoint, right? It's really critically important as a business owner that you get step out of the weeds, as they say, and get an aerial view of what's going on, because otherwise you're going to miss external changes in the environment. You might miss some things that are going to change legally in the like things completely out of your control. So I first say step back and say, what do you want to do? So you mentioned the fiscal year. I always have clients at the end of the calendar year here. We've had 12 months in a business. Everything you've learned has changed you. Every mistake has changed you. So let's look at setting new goals for the year and what it's going to take to achieve those goals. And if a goal is adding a revenue stream, then let's not like just have somebody come in. Let's think about, where do you want your practice to go? One of the shifts I spoke about is the shift from just aesthetics or IVs to longevity, right? If that's part of where you're going, what does that look like to you? There's a lot of devices that aid with brain waves and mental health, which affect everything in the body. Of course, anything, the brain controls everything. So there's things like that can be added. There's hyperbaric, which is also a whole body device that has a number of outcomes for patients that are beneficial. So think about where you want to go with your practice. Also think about, is there something you want to scale back or remove from your practice that just isn't a fit anymore with where you are and what you're passionate about and where you see things going?
Let's just go back to
Yeah.
hyperbaric for a second, because the only thing I know about hyperbaric is that elite athletes use it. And you'll certainly in Australia to be like, yeah, most, I'm thinking particularly of footballers and maybe cricketers, it's, hey, I've got another game in 6 days' time and our star players got injured. And it's, oh, quick, let's get them to go into the
Mhm.
hyperbaric chamber for I don't know, one session, a few sessions, which presumably has got some kind of healing property. We're not here to sell you a hyperbaric chamber,
Yeah,
listeners,
no.
but what, just trying to understand what benefit that would be for patients.
Oh my gosh. I will say personally, if I could have one in my house, I would. There's
Okay.
benefits for there's longevity benefits. Let's say somebody suffered a concussion, there's brain health benefits, PTSD. It's been proven to help people with ASD, people who are nonverbal. There's probably like many things. There's a number of studies that could be done over and over again. Say you've just had a knee replacement or a hip replacement or other surgery. There's healing benefits to spending time in a hyperbaric chamber. So it goes on and on. So it is also a device that could fit in a number of different types of practices.
Okay, all right,
Um,
that's interesting. All right, so again, we recognize that it's probably better to start by revisiting your vision and saying what I want this practice to be and go, all right, I can see maybe things are a bit tired. I must admit, there is always time to revisit doing the basics. If you look at champions in many fields, they just they tend to do the basics very well. But nevertheless, you might go, no, that's fine, Angus, we've got that covered. In our industry, we do this space really well, but we're really looking for another revenue source. We're maybe looking for a passion that there's a bit of a something there, and we want to take that to the next level. So what you're suggesting, Jessica, is in effect that the listeners go and do a bunch of research, and then it's you contacting the relevant companies to find this out rather than just walking around a trade show and going, well, that looks interesting. If you got a spare
Yeah.
100 grand, because we can give you one.
Yes. And I would also say, if you've got somebody trying to rush you into a decision, I always say rushing leads to failure. Never rush into something. If there's pressure, something's not right, in my opinion.
Yeah,
There should be no pressure.
yeah,
If it's the right thing for you, you should have the time to think about it. And again, look at the financials. What's the impact to you if it sits in a corner and doesn't do anything for your business? Will you be okay or not?
yeah.
Don't do anything that's going to take away the success you've had or take away from your cash flow and cushion of financial benefit to your business. You want to always have 6 months of savings in your business. So keep that in mind and know that whatever you pay for something, you'll never be able to sell it for that same amount. So if it doesn't fit your business, look at what used devices are selling for. And if there's not a lot of them, great. If there's a lot of them, think about that and why is that the case? Reach out to the people selling and ask why they're selling.
How interesting. I heard a number of years ago, it's a strange analogy, but I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and at one point I was on the vet side, so dealing with vets and pet stores and so on, and that they actually have published dumpage rates by breed of dog and cat. And so you might think, oh, I really like that breed and I like how they look and so on. But in fact, you can get data which shows that if you're considering getting breed A, you're tossing that up between breed A and breed B. They actually do have published dumpage data. It doesn't, just to be clear, listeners, we're not talking about dumping on the
No.
scrap heap, but they will be what rate of these animals are surrendered to dog shelters,
Back,
cat
back to the rescue.
yeah,
Yeah.
back to the rescue places. And it's in some ways getting a pet's such an emotional decision. I've grown up with pets my whole life. But on the other hand, as you say, rushing into that decision because I'll pause for a second there, Jessica. My wife is very keen to get another dog for us. And her behavior at the moment would be, hey, I just happened to be going by the shelter, the pound, and there was this gorgeous dog. But to me, that is exactly an analogy of what we're talking about, which is this a sober decision for this? And the payment from a pet, of course, is not dollars and cents necessarily, but yes, quite an interesting
There
analogy.
is, if I may, because I happen to be a very loving, proud owner of a pit mix who people look at him and say, is that a pit? And he also happens to be a lab. And the minute I say he's a lab, oh, and the demeanor totally changes, and suddenly their dog can play. But part of ownership is, and this can, I'm going to hopefully bring it back to medical equipment, but it's the having this thing that you want, but then putting the energy into it that it takes to make it successful.
Yes.
So with my pit bull, who was a rescue, we brought in a trainer who's specifically for pit bulls and their demeanor and making sure that we're always the alpha and we're always in control, always, and we are. It's the people who don't go through those steps that aren't successful. Just if you buy a device, you're going to have to take the steps to make sure it's a success in your business. You don't just buy it, it doesn't just sell itself.
No.
Get your staff trained in it, get you trained in it. And here's one other thing I'm going to say as I mentioned training the staff. If you're a business owner, involve your staff because if you have this vision and the staff, you're not sharing the vision and you're not articulating and you're not, and your people are disjointed from you and you're not marching to the same beat, nothing's going to work. You got to fix that before you do anything in your clinic. But as you're adding a revenue stream, you need to make sure that they're behind it too, because you aren't going to be the person getting your patients on board with everything you bring into the practice. They are. So you're just as you need to be passionate and on board, your staff does as well. And that is part of the expense. Just like I mentioned, the training is part of the expense to making the pit bull work. The training the staff and making sure they're on board is part of the expense of adding a revenue stream. You can't just expect them to do because you brought it in and you own the business.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't work.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I will admit I'm aware of quite a lot of training for reception staff as really an extension of we'll call it the sales process that happens in surgery. Now, I'm aware some of the listeners, especially newer listeners to Practice Growth HQ, perhaps you've not heard our previous episodes when we're talking about sales. None of us want to be salesy, but the fact is, when you're having communications in the surgery, in the operatory with your patient, it is in effect a sales exercise. You're needing to sell them the concept that you've got. And one of the things that can so easily happen is that you're in that place, which is a bit uncomfortable for most people, let's face it. None of us
Especially
really
medical
want,
practitioners.
yeah, none of us
Yeah.
really want to be in a room with a medical practitioner for a medical reason. Mostly that's the case. And what happens is they have that conversation and the healthcare professional says, Angus, you really need to do this, or this is what we recommend, or so on. And then I'll go out, my mind's still ticking over, I haven't committed, and I'll go and talk to the receptionist. And in many cases, doctors mentioned it. I'm like, does it really work? Should I really be doing that? You're looking for that reassurance. And so I can see that if the practice has got a new toy, then yeah, you need everybody singing from the same hymn sheet, don't you?
Yes, every single person has to be marching to the same drummer, as I
Yeah.
said, and that's
Yeah.
absolutely true. Some of the most successful clinics I work with, it's almost entirely the receptionists'
Yeah.
benefit. And a big part of non-success as I'm evaluating and problem solving in a struggling practice, it often boils down to how the appointments are being set, how the follow-up's being done, how the phone is being answered. All of that has a massive impact on the business. As you pointed out, it can lead to the success or the failure.
Absolutely. Jessica, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I think this has been a very interesting discussion because this is a real phenomena in healthcare. Bigger industries means bigger disposable income. And yeah, I personally have seen many examples of practices that have got excited by a big piece of machinery. Maybe it's not even that big, just expensive. Let's call it big
Yeah.
ticket. And in some cases, it's been amazing for the practice and it's really helped revolutionize. And in other cases, it's been something that's just been gathering dust. Jessica, if people want to learn more about you or get in touch, what should they do?
You know what? Easiest to just, if you go to my website, buildyourcashmedicalpractice.com, you can schedule a free one-on-one with me. I'd be happy to talk with you, or you can just go there and check out some things and happy to send you information or anything like that that would help you.
Good one. Buildyourcashmedicalpractice.com. Fortunately, this is one I don't need to spell out. You've done well. I think everybody knows how to spell that, and you can always Google it if you do. Once again, thank you so much for your time, Jessica. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone, we've covered a bit there, haven't we? And as I like to say every week, it's not knowledge that's power, it's applied knowledge that's power, which begs the question, what's one thing that you heard today, one action that you can take as a result of what you heard? Go and do that before you go on to the next thing. Finally, if you got some value from our time together, then please head to where you heard this show and leave us a lovely review to bring us the encouragement to bring you more great content every week on Practice Growth HQ.